folks. Good afternoon. I'm showing 2:30 here, Central Time, so why don't we get started. I want to introduce myself. My name is Chris Prentice, and I'm the president of the real estate division here for Brook Hollow Financial, and I do want to welcome all of you. I'm calling from Chicago, Illinois, where we're headquartered. Nonetheless beautiful all the time, but a rainy day here in Chicago, as I know some of you folks that are my neighbors here are experiencing. But a few things before we get started. I do want to make a special welcome. We've got some of our new partners across the country on the phone today for some initial training, and I welcome you. I see some of our existing partners on the phone here with some of their new colleagues and some of the folks we've been working with for a refresher class, and we welcome you. And of course, I quote-unquote see some new faces here, and of course, welcome to you too. A couple of things, and this is our fault. First of all, we did not make mention when you signed up for the webinar. If you are a CPA or a tax advisor for your CPE credit, we've got a hodgepodge of real estate professionals on the phone today. So you will all be getting a survey at the end here. Those folks that are looking to apply for the 1-hour CPE credit, you'll just simply need to fill that survey out and return it to us, and we will make sure you get a completion certificate for that. And I also wanted to make a note that because of the number of attendees we've got today, everyone on your side will be muted vocally. So you can't talk to me on the phone, but you can reach me by the question tab in your toolbar there. So if any questions pop up, any concerns, any issues, any general questions, any comments, any heckling, of course you can reach me through the question marks, or I'm sorry, the question bar. So with that said, let's dive right into this. We have something here that, as mentioned, a number of you have already been working with us on, and those of you that aren't familiar with us, pretty fun product here, and it's really just a new spin on very old school blocking and tackling. So let's go through here what we will be covering today. Give you a preview here of this this structured sale product. You know, just to make sure we're all on the same page, a very quick capital gain review. Won't spend a lot of time on that, but just to make sure we're covering the nuts and bolts, make sure we're on the same page, and where these capital gains will apply to our strategy and what we're going to be talking about today. Quick review on installment sale, which is the boring name for that is Internal Revenue Code 453. And depending on where you are at the country, I've heard it called 50 different things in 50 different states, but sometimes it's known as land contract, seller financing, private mortgaging, carrying a note, all sorts of different things. Then we'll get into the structured sale. Obviously here the nuts and bolts of it. And then our humble claim to fame, which is the 1031 exchange fallback, and we'll talk about that. And then some strategies for the product here and where it can come into play, an actual client deliverable, so you can actually see what we provide the client and you as the advisor, or if you're the client, him or herself, and then an actual cash flow analysis that we did, and it's actually it's a lot more fun than it sounds. And then of course the Q&A is as we're going along here. Please use your question link here on your toolbar and go ahead and type away, and we'll I'm a solo show today, so I'm giving the presentation and operating the webinar. I will get to your question as soon as possible, and anything that I do miss, we always follow up afterwards to get that answered for you. So feel free to ask away, and we'll get that answered sooner or later. So let's look at some benefits here of offering a structured sale and what this all really means to your clients. Well, it's a tax deferral, tax efficient strategy, offering some growth where there previously either was not available, or for most folks didn't know that this could even be done or it existed. For you as the advisor, obviously helping clients, giving a competitive advantage, and of course clients appreciate when you're able to bring them some options, and for a lot of times this makes sense for your client, and of course you've got a happy client. And obviously keeping a transaction going forward, which can lead to some additional consults for your business. Now, there's a lot of times we hear where this cap rate is, and I'm sure a lot of you folks hear this as well, where the cap gain is, I want to cash in my chips, pay the 15%, and be done with it. And a lot of the folks here on the phone that are the tax advisors, you're usually our best friend because, and I want to make note of this, we are not a CPA firm or a legal firm, although we are CPAs and attorneys. My colleagues and I, we do not offer any consulting like that. We refer this business out to the folks here on the phone. We tell the clients, go talk with your CPA, with your advisor, whoever that may be, and usually after they get done talking with you, dealing with and seeing in paper what their tax consequences are, usually they give a call back saying, Chris, you know what, we have made a mistake, we want to be friends again, what can we do here? So with that said, obviously, it's usually higher and greater than 15%, as a number of you obviously know. There's that good old recapture rate, which to this day still surprises me. A number of folks that usually know what they're doing completely forget that there's going to be recapture at the end of the rainbow here. And obviously that's a huge hit, especially for properties that have been fully depreciated. So they've got to pay the recapture. And we see this a lot where folks don't understand that if they take this big hit, this may throw them into an AMT situation. Obviously, this is going to, this depends if it's an individual or a corporation and that individual's tax situation. But again, where appropriate, this is another hit for folks. Sometimes we see that it throws them out of phase-outs, both for the personal exemptions and the deductions. And this last point here, obviously, this varies from state to state. Where California, Oregon, Iowa, you're over 9% in state income, and then folks in Florida, Nevada, and such, it's 0. So obviously, this is going to this is affected greatly depending on the state you're in. And we typically see that the rate, when all these things are taken into consideration, is double that 15%. It's usually over 30%. So obviously, and we've covered a lot of this. Client says things like they're not concerned about the 15%. Well, this third bullet here is really where the rubber hits the road for us. And working with you, we simply work through the transaction. And again, I'll show you a client deliverable and how we work through the transaction with the client. Number one, to see if this makes sense and if we can help, and if so, where. And a lot of times it doesn't make sense for them to use our product. Obviously, the deferral makes sense, and if and where we can help. Okay, so let's get into the basics of 453, IRC, Internal Revenue Code 453, installment sale treatment. What is this? Well, it's the disposition of a property, the sale of a property, where one of the payments from the buyer to the seller, or actually the seller receives the payments from the buyer in a tax year after the year of that sale. The income then from that payment is taxed under the installment method. Again, from a multi-year sale, it's prorated. But this last point is really where the good stuff lies, where the gain, the tax is paid or recognized only as receipt is taken for that given year. And that's really the base here, the core of what provides the tax deferral for 453. You're only paying taxes on the money that you take for that transaction for that calendar year. So let's look at an example. And again, I want to preface this. These are very, very basic examples, less to show you the numbers, more to show you the concept. And we'll get into the numbers in a little bit, but really that's on a client-by-client basis. So this is more just to show you the concept. So we've got a $300,000 sale, and God love folks where they're still making money. You sold it for $400,000. Obviously, your profit, your gain is going to be $100,000. So this is what a typical cash sale is going to look like. And again, this is just taking the federal income capital gain rate of 15% as an example for folks making over $66,100 where the Fed tax rate applies. So you're going to have your $15,000 in that year, which again sold in 2009. That's going to happen in next year in 10. Now let's look at installment sale. Well, basics here. You'll see here that same transaction, $100,000, and again, we're just using the capital gain. In our product and installment sale treatment, all of the proceeds need to be used. But again, just to clarify and to show the concept of it, in this situation, let's say this client wanted to take note payments for 5 years, over 5 years, in equal payments, equal lump sums. So that $100,000 is broken into 5 equal payments of $20,000 each. Fair enough. Well, at that tax rate, this client now is only paying for that year $3,000, and so on and so forth. So they're, in essence, deferring their pain over time. And in typical installment sale fashion, and again, this is probably not too new for most of you folks, there's usually an interest rate charged by the seller in order to do this. And it's typically anywhere from 3 to 7%, depending on what's negotiated. So on top of the deferral benefit, they're also earning an interest rate on the pre-tax amount. So in the first year, this person is getting 20, and let's just use 5% as an example. In the first year, this person is getting $20,000 plus $5,000 there of the interest, 5% of $100,000 pre-tax, and so on and so forth. So in the next year, they'd get 5% of $80,000. In the next year, they'd get 5% of $60,000. And so on and so forth. So not only are they getting deferral benefit as mentioned, but there's a growth component, there's an interest component. And this is, again, blocking and tackling on installment sale treatment. So what are the benefits in summary? Well, obviously you're deferring the payment of the capital gain, and where appropriate, and this is significant in a lot of cases, you're deferring the recapture. You create a lot of folks use this to create a stream of income on a property that they no longer wanted to manage for whatever their reasons are. And that's point number 4 here. Okay, now there's a flip side to the installment sales, and again, I know some of you folks that I've worked with here in the past that are on the phone, and I know a lot of you have witnessed these situations, and this have been huge issues. Number 1, especially in this day and age. So if there's a note payment being made by an entity, and that entity goes bankrupt, or they're just not paying that note. Well, now that the original seller who was counting on that note payment is no more getting that cash flow. And when that happens, obviously the client has right to get back the property. But at best, and for states where this is, and I don't even want to use the word easiest, but where it's the easiest in comparison, it's a major headache, a major legal and tax headache going through a land contract, an installment sale foreclosure situation. Now here's something not quite as painful, and something that really has morphed into a large part of our business, where there's an early note payoff. So let's say the person that was paying the note sells the property halfway through. They still owe the payee a certain amount of money in installment sale treatment, but they pay the note. They sell the property. They pay off the remaining amount of that note. So that person now takes receipt of the remaining amount of those funds and pays their appropriate taxes on it. So yes, they're getting paid, but it kind of ruins their original intent of looking for installment sale treatment. So really, in most cases, not the best scenario. And yes, there's usually early payoff clauses in these contracts, but what we've witnessed and what we've seen from a lot of our advisors and from a lot of our clients, those are, again, sometimes very messy and easy to get out of for the folks selling that property for a number of reasons. So this has been, again, not as painful as number 1, but again, not as advantageous as remaining in the note payment. And 1 and 3 really go hand in hand. Typically, folks that are foreclosing on a property, on a note, not paying their bills, in essence, their number 1 priority is usually not taking A-plus care of that property. So not only does the original seller have to go through all the legal hassle of getting the property back, typically they're getting this property back in condition that is less than par. Now, kind of a softball pitch there for a structured sale, which we, or a structured sale actually, can eliminate these situations. So let's get into this structured sale and what this product entails. So I'm going to take a step back and let's take a look actually from point one how this all looks visually. So visually, here's an installment sale, obviously, and we just talked about this. So the buyer would give a cash, maybe some sort of cash up front, and then a promise to pay. So a note, and in essence for that note and possibly some upfront money, the seller gives the buyer the property. Fair enough, pretty basic. So let's look at a structured sale, and we're going to take this in chunks because it's a lot easier than this is going to end up looking. So this is the essence of our product, and so I'm going to go through this, take you all by the hand through this, and I'm with the goal of making sure this makes very easy sense at the end. So let's look at this. So let's bring up, as we just mentioned, an installment sale treatment, a seller and a buyer. Okay, fair enough. So let's say, and I'm going to pick on one of my clients on the phone here, Joe. Joe, I know you're out there, so I'm going to pick on you. Let's say I go to Joe, and we'll use this through example. I say, Joe, I want to buy your property. Joe says to me, Chris, that's great. Make sure you've got all your financing in place. And so we go to the closing table. It's all the same to me as the buyer over here. But Joe determines that he wants installment sale treatment because he's going to have this huge tax burden. So Joe will have already worked with Brook Hollow, with us, to determine a cash flow that he wants to see. He can, as flexible as he needs to be and as much as he needs to structure this cash flow to meet his needs, his company's needs, his family needs, who's ever involved in this transaction, those cash flow needs can be structured. So in essence, what will happen is at closing then, there will already be direction in the contract between Joe and I will go to closing knowing Joe is going to do a structured sale. Doesn't matter to me. I'm going to bring my financing, however it is I'm financing the transaction, to the closing table. Joe will then still give me the property, and then at escrow, in essence, what's going to happen, I'll bring up this because this is all Allstate, those funds, instead of Joe taking receipt of those proceeds, are going to be transferred to Allstate, where Allstate will then annuitize those payments back to Joe. So let's look at this again. And again, I hope this isn't causing too much of a headache, but it's really right here. Joe is transferring or is electing to transfer, and this is again where we're involved, making sure the contracts are in place, making sure the cash flow is in place with Allstate, transferring those funds to Allstate. Allstate annuitizes these funds, and then as Joe takes these annuitized payments over however he's structured to take these payments, and the flexibility on taking these payments is endless, and we'll get into that in a little bit. As he takes those payments, excuse me, for any calendar year are eligible for installment sale treatment. So in essence, he has now severed the relationship between a typical installment sale, which is between Joe and I, and he's severed that relationship, so now he does not have to worry anymore about my credibility of paying the note, and he doesn't have to worry anymore about having an early payoff because those note obligations has, in essence, been transferred to Allstate. And a note on security, and a reason we use Allstate is really is really threefold. Number one is the security of the product, and I'm gonna use an example of a very known case in the last year of security of annuitized money, and the annuity family of monies. We're going to use AIG, which is, I know, technically a bad word in the insurance industry, and it should be. However, an interesting point here is that all annuitized money, all annuitized clients that were getting payments from AIG, all of that money, annuity, institutional funding agreements, not at any time was a penny of that money at risk for those clients. Those clients are still getting their payments as if nothing happened with AIG. And the reason for that, and the reason that annuitized proceeds are so secure, is that the regulations around those monies and for insurance firms to be able to offer annuity payments is so strict and so regulated, which is why it's really arguably one of the safest funding vehicles in the market. Reason being, and again, this is a very high-level overview of what it is, and we'll use Allstate. Allstate, in order to annuitize money, has to be 103% capitalized on any proceeds that they want to annuitize, and that capitalization needs to be in some sort of mix of treasuries and bonds, which obviously is one of the most secure funding vehicles that any of us can be invested with. So they need to be not only overcapitalized, but it needs to be regulated for that annuity client. Now, on top of that, Allstate, based here in Chicago, or one of the suburbs of Chicago, actually, so we work very closely with them. They remain, even through these interesting times, an AM Best A+ rated firm. So we take a very conservative approach on our consult, and so does Allstate with their product, especially with the structured sale product. So it's a good fit for us. So I hope that makes sense. I'm happy to take any individual calls after the webinar to go into a little more detail on this. So moving right along. Yeah, some of the benefits here. Obviously, as mentioned, there's a high amount of flexibility for the client to structure these payments. They can be taken monthly, annually, in periodic lump sums. We've got clients that say they're still in their 30s or 40s and not yet ready to retire. They are using this as their conservative retirement vehicle, and they're not starting to take payments for 10 years. So that money is sitting in their institutional funding agreement, annuitized money, with Allstate for 10 years, pre-tax, growing that entire time. Obviously, there's an interest component. They're not paying any taxes on that money for the entire 10 years. And then when they start taking those payments, obviously they'll pay the appropriate taxes then for that given calendar year. So a great situation there. But again, that's just an example to show the flexibility here of how you can take payments. Payments can be either for life or a period certain annuity. We haven't, to this point, we have not done one life client yet. Most clients like the certain. And it's exactly what it says. Life is you get paid for the remainder of your life or for lack thereof. So let's say I'm the annuitant. I'm 40 years old. I decide to annuitize my payments, and that bus of life comes and takes me out tomorrow. Well, Allstate wins. I live to be 180. Well, then I win. But we haven't seen a lot of clients with this situation because there's no estate planning vehicle there. To this point, 100% of our clients have been certain, and that's where you're exactly what it is. You're paid a certain amount for however long you structure those payments, and then once it's paid out, you've gotten all your money, you've gotten all your interest payments, all is said and done. If something should happen to me before I take all of my payments, then the remaining payments will just flow into my estate, and then however my will dictates who should be receiving these payments is exactly how my heirs will receive those payments. So those are the two options there. And again, there's no restrictions on the payment stream. The benefits are matched, as mentioned, to the seller's needs. And we'll get to how we kind of, because that's a wide funnel, obviously. A lot of people start scratching their heads going, I have no idea how to even start. And we'll get to how we help consult with that in a second. And payments can be made structured to keep folks under certain tax triggers, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And obviously, the money that you're not paying to the government, you're paying to yourself and using for yourself and having it work for you. So that's some basic stuff there. So there's some opportunities here, and where can you start using some of this consult? Obviously, along with a 1031 exchange, which is a great deferral method, but folks, maybe where it's not a fit, where a 1031 is not a fit, looking for an exit strategy to get out of whether it's their real estate and any real capital asset. This works for not only real estate, it works for non-exchangeable assets such as primary residences, such as vacation and second homes. We've done a lot of work with folks selling their business. Goodwill, which is not an exchangeable asset, can be structured, is eligible for installment sale treatment. And we've worked with a lot of folks doing that, especially because penny one is capital gain. There's no base with goodwill. So it's a good deferral strategy for those folks. And this has really gained traction with us, where I had mentioned earlier, where there's a early payoff note. They can roll that note, the remaining note, into a structure, and they can, in essence, hit the reset button. They can restructure their cash flow to maybe match what they were doing, or to reset it depending on where they're at in life, and they will never have to worry about an early payoff again. So really a great situation there for those folks. And I jumped the gun there, but non-exchangeable assets. Obviously, your primary residence, vacation home, partnership interests. We're working with a manufacturing firm where they're going through a buyout, and 22 of their employees, long-term employees, had partnership interests in this company private stock. They have a huge capital gain, and it's going to be taxed ordinary income, which obviously is a very much higher a higher tax bracket than a capital gain. So we're really able to help those folks. Short-term assets, developers like us, flippers, while not as hot as they used to be, there's still folks that they buy something and right away they're able to move it and have a gain, where that may not be an exchangeable asset because it's viewed as inventory, but that is eligible for installment sale treatment. So that's something we can work with. And again, I jumped the gun there. Business goodwill. So they're selling a business. We do a lot of work with REITs and with commercial brokers, and God love the folks that have this problem, but where there's a large commission or a large bonus, like I mentioned earlier, from a private firm where there's a buyout or buying out of a partnership interest, or a commission to say a commercial broker. We absolutely can structure this. We worked with a gentleman that was completed a large REIT transaction. He took some of the money from that transaction and cashed out with it, and the other part, he was a young guy, or I like to think he was a young guy, early 40s, and the rest of it was going to be structured for when his daughters begin college in, I believe it was 14 years. So really a great use of the product to match this client's lifestyle and needs. Okay, moving right along, and our humble claim to fame. So let's take what we have just used or learned as a structured sale and put it in the context of a client, a business, an entity is in a 1031 exchange. And we'll define that as the monies, the proceeds, are sitting with a qualified intermediary. Otherwise, sometimes known as a Starker exchange, depending where you're at in the country or how old school you are. So what is this 1031 exchange? Well, again, the exchanger currently is with a QI, a qualified intermediary. However, and I'm sure you folks that have worked a lot with 1031 exchanges probably have some good circus stories, I know I do, on reasons that these exchanges fail because some of these time frames are so tight and crazy. But the bottom line is, client is in an exchange. They can't ID for whatever reason, or they don't want to ID, or they just want out of real estate. By the 45th day, they decide they don't want to do this, or they have ID'd, and this is more the case with what we've seen, and they can't close on their properties. So they are really against a rock and a hard place there. But the exchanger obviously is looking for some deferral help. That's why they're looking at a 1031 exchange in the first place. But they're still looking for some deferral help. This absolutely can be rolled into a structured sale directly from the intermediary. Here's some, and my colleague, the general counsel, will cringe at this, but here's a little more legal mumbo-jumbo that I will just summarize for you. All this states is that before, similar to a closing of a traditional structured sale, before the failure date, whether it's the 45th date, whether it's the 180th date, or in between there where maybe there's a boot situation, an equity boot situation, we need to be involved to alter the exchange agreement, showing that the client is giving direction to the intermediary firm to transfer those funds so they don't take receipt directly to Allstate. And obviously this client will have worked with us to determine the best cash flow for their own personal situation. We have a question. And it's a good one. I keep forgetting to put this in our slides. The question is does this require an ID? And thank you for that softball pitch. John, thank you for the question. And the answer is no, it does not. This, and some of our QI partners have deemed this the fourth ID. This does not need to be invoked previous to the exchange, and it does not require an ID. So you commercial or realtors out there, absolutely go out, and I know you're trying to get the second leg of that transaction. You totally fully utilize all of your ID options. This will be waiting there for you. This is not an exchange. This is purely a transfer of proceeds before receipt to Allstate. So this is nothing to do with the 1031. So they can absolutely go ID. All they're doing is giving direction to the intermediary before receipt is taken, because the intermediary is still legally the principal of that property. All they're doing is giving direction to transfer those proceeds to Allstate. And that's all point 4 and 5 make. And let's look at this visually. And again, not to cause any more headaches, but you will have seen this already. But obviously, it's the same structure, except instead of a seller and a buyer, you've got the exchanger here who sold, who obviously the relinquished property, has transferred, those proceeds were transferred to the QI, with QI still as principal of that property. The exchanger obviously has not taken constructive receipt. They have given direction to the QI to transfer those funds to Allstate, as we've seen this earlier, and again, then Allstate makes those payments. There we go. Got a little ahead of myself. Okay, so a little bit of summary from the previous one, because some of them overlap, but where does this make sense for folks in a 1031 exchange? Well, obviously, in a deferred exchange, when the exchanger either fails to find suitable properties, or they simply want out of doing the exchange, want out of real estate, but are still looking for beneficial tax treatment, fails to purchase the replacement property in time. And again, right here, this point C, this has been another one of our more popular applications of the product is for boot. And I like this word that one of our clients out of Texas uses. He had a little bit of a chunk left over. His chunk was $1.3 million, and I like clients that call $1.3 million. Well, I like anybody that calls $1.3 million a chunk, and so we were able to, not only was he able to do the exchange, he fell short on replacing all of the funds, and his attitude was, I want to pay the government as little as possible. So we were able to assist him with that, again, quote unquote, boot chunk. In a failed reverse exchange where the client cannot sell their relinquished property within 180 days, excellent backup for those folks. And again, I think I've talked plenty of times on the non-exchangeable situations, and that's really more for a traditional structured sale. And again, some of these things we have already covered for a early payoff, which I have, and this is the south side of Chicago coming out in me. I'm calling those the busted installment sale. And if the exchanger, and this is more because here in the Midwest we work with a lot of farmers where they are looking for an out for their land. They have property that has been in the family sometimes for over 100 years. High appreciation, low base. These folks are not. They're looking for cash flow, and they're looking for deferral help. They're looking for tax deferral help, lifestyle help. Yet they, a 1031 is an option for them, but a lot of these folks are not comfortable exchanging into bricks and mortars. They like dirt. They don't like the stuff that's built on the dirt and all the moving parts that come along with it. So that may not be a comfort zone for them, where this is a perfect situation. They want to turn their appreciated land into retirement, into cash flow, into a growth situation. And not only farmers, but I've also mentioned here land investors. A lot of folks that just like investing in dirt, don't like the stuff on the dirt, can turn this into a nice situation for themselves. And we had already mentioned the larger commissions and bonuses, and I just got ahead of myself there. My apologies. With that said, we are going to move a little back in time here, like Marty McFly, into the client deliverable, and we've got another 15 minutes here, folks. We'll be done actually a little early. So let me close out of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up our process and how we funnel, as I mentioned earlier, this flexibility you have with designing your cash flow, how we structure that to work with you and your client to figure out the best situation on how to take this cash flow. So it all begins with our client questionnaire. And this is something we do either via sending it to you, sending it to the client direct, or we set up a teleconference, and a lot of clients like to go through this over the phone, and so we'll conduct the meeting, teleconference or in person, depending if that's appropriate, and then going through these questions and answers and gathering this information. And this questionnaire will be attached to our follow-up email that'll come within 48 hours to you folks. But you see here, we gather information on the actual transaction, so we know what we're dealing with and how much capital gain there truly is. And here we gather some information about the profile for the taxpayer, so we can determine which bracket they're in, what situations they're in, their family situation, so we can offer some advice and help advise if estate planning is appropriate for them to take into consideration. Their investment profile, so again, we can give us some different thoughts if they need the money now. Maybe this is not an all or nothing situation. They can take some cash and pay their appropriate taxes on that, and maybe they can structure the rest. We work with structures down to and including $100,000 and up. So it's like a 1031 exchange. It's not an all or nothing situation, but the part of the proceeds that is not used will not be sheltered, and then you'll just pay your appropriate taxes. And then some of the other fun stuff here. What are your plans for the money? Do you have any long-term needs? Do you have any short-term needs? Again, gathering this information so that we can help you advise the best cash flow for the client. So my colleague, our CFO, and his team will usually work through these numbers and then come up with some different scenarios and provide a very detailed spreadsheet. And I'll let everyone kind of acclimate themselves with this. This is an actual client scenario, actual numbers. And this goes out actually for 30 pages. This client had a 30-year plan, annual lump sum. So for every payment they have, they know exactly to the penny what they're getting and what their tax implications are. So the majority of the folks on this phone, this is a great tax planning tool for you and your client, because we will have worked with you already. So when you're filling out Form 6252 for installment sale treatment, all this will already be squared away for you. So anyways, we will take the client situation here, and this was a $3 million transaction. Plug in the appropriate situation. So obviously you can see here there was a very low base, $200,000. And then you see the depreciation factors here in the blue. Their income portfolio or profile here. Some of the add-ons, the AMT you see there. And the state, this was actually in Minnesota. For you, I know we've got some Minnesotians here on the phone. Yes, us Chicago folks, we are a little scared of Favre. Anyway, so we've got 6.5 there for the state. And you'll see here, of that $3 million, this client ended up, their tax consequence of the $3 million, you'll see here in the yellow, was $866,000. Now that, to me, is a lot of money. And you'll see here, we've talked earlier that, and this was a perfect example of the client, before he talked to his CPA, he was like, you know what, I think I'm going to pay my 15% in tax and be done with it. Well, obviously, 15% grew to almost 41%, and that client called us back in a hurry. And so you'll see here through these numbers, now instead of having 2.134, which again is obviously good money, but compared to $3 million, that's a pretty good tax hit. So we ran the structure. So getting into the internal rate of return. And Joan, I saw your question earlier, a few minutes ago. I didn't mean to ignore it. I was going to get into it right here. Obviously, there's an internal rate of return that we quote from Allstate, and those rates obviously change frequently depending on the market. That rate will be determined by a number of factors. Obviously, what the market's producing, and then however long the client wants to structure it, the longer, the higher the internal rate of return, and when they want to start taking payments. The further out in the future they start taking payments, obviously, the internal rate of return is going to be higher. Allstate has the money longer. So they have with this client, they are getting a 5.29% internal rate of return guaranteed by Allstate for the life of these payouts. Now, 2 years ago, 5.29 guaranteed by this sort of vehicle was considered conservative. 5.29 in these days is better than minus 30. So folks have taken a different view on conservative, secure money these days. Now, with that said, though, our CFO came up with this spreadsheet, and it's really it's a good numbers spreadsheet here. There's two things that need to be taken into consideration: the internal rate of return. Now, with that said, this 5.29 guaranteed, and there's no ongoing commissions or management fees that the client has to pay to Allstate. This is locked in. How we make money. And again, Joan, thank you for the question, asking how much do we charge for this consult. At this point, this is completely complimentary for you and for your client. We will run these numbers, work with you to see if this makes sense. We get paid from Allstate. We're an agent of Allstate, and our commission is already built into this 5.29. So the client, that 5.29 is going to work for their entire $3 million. Now, there's a fully taxable equivalent situation here, because it's not fair to compare 5.29 apples to apples to what the client would need to make after paying their taxes. So what would they have to make year after year for 30 years on their 2.134 to match this structure, to match the benefit of the deferral and the interest rate? Well, lo and behold, for this client, they were going to have to go for 30 years, year after year, and get 8.73% to match what this structure was going to do. And on top of that, this being in one of the most secure vehicles that you can find in the market. This client all of a sudden was like, okay, this doesn't sound so bad. So you can see here they're getting a very apples-to-apples comparison, a very positive return on this money. Now, sometimes this number is higher, especially when it's ordinary income situations, and sometimes it's lower depending on the situation. But again, that's the point. We get to this point, so we run black and white numbers, return these to you and your client, and it pretty much explains itself, whether the client wants to do this or not. And we like bringing this, again, back down to the black and white numbers. So I hope that made a good question. Thank you. What about a 1033 exchange? And just to make sure we're all up on a 1033, sometimes in Chicago it happens a lot where it's an eminent domain situation where, let's say, the city's coming through and they are going to knock your investment down, your land or your property down, because they need to build a highway. Well, they can go ahead and do that, and those proceeds then are under a 1033. And boy, I am sorry, and some of you CPAs, please ding me here on the questions if I'm wrong on this. I'm just going to talk basic. I am not a CPA, but that is, you have 2 years to take your pre-tax proceeds and exchange it into another property, and you do not need a QI for a 1033. and instead of having 180 days, you have a full 2 years. So the government, God loves them, gives you a little bit more of a break when they come through and declare your property theirs. But I say that out of fun. A lot of times that works out well for the investors. So yes, you can use this on a 1033, but similar to a structured sale, a traditional structured sale, or with it being used in a 1031, which is the 1031 fallback, we just need to be involved before that 2-year point is invoked, showing that they're going to transfer those pre-tax proceeds into a structured sale. So the answer to your quick question is yes. So thank you for that. Oh, I'm sorry. Boy, even better. Okay, it is, I was just dinged by the same resource. Thank you. It's actually 3 years. So scratch what I said on the 2 years. You actually have 3 years for that. So thank you. Okay, great. We have another question here. Thank you. Let's see. How does it work with Equity Boot? Oh, okay. Yeah, with Equity Boot, this is a situation where, let's say, the client, and we'll use an example. They have $2 million in an exchange, and they exchange into a $1.5 million property. And again, I'm using very, very simple numbers here. As you all know, there's a lot of more moving parts, but their Equity Boot in that example is $500,000. So we would just need to be involved previous to that exchange happening, whether it's simultaneous, whatever day it is. We need to be involved before that happens to amend the exchange agreement, showing that that Equity Boot is going to be transferred into a structured sale. So thank you for that question. Okay, we're actually done a little before our hour, and if there are no other questions, I will bring this to closure. And there we go. With that said, please feel free to contact me with any further questions, and we'd look forward to working with you. If you'd like to, a lot of you would like to offer this webinar, sometimes to your individual office for your folks, and we're happy to do that, whether it's me or one of my colleagues. We're happy to provide that service for you. And for the CPE interested folks, we will be, as mentioned, in the next 48 hours sending out a summary email with the survey. And this is more my operations manager, but I believe to get your CPE credit certificate, we do need that survey returned. And on top of that, I just appreciate any feedback so we can continue to provide better information for the folks out there. So with that said, thank you everyone for your time. I appreciate your attendance, and I look forward to working with all of you. Take care and have a good one. Bye-bye.